everybody. Welcome to the Carlam Cymru revision sessions. My name is Miss Hacker. This evening's session now is going to focus on our Unit 1 AS exam, specifically prose study and how to approach the novel. Session is going to last about 45 minutes, where Miss Davis is going to run through the relevant content. If you've got any questions during the session, please use the question and answer section at the top, and we'll do our best to answer you. I'm going to be popping a hyperlink into the Q&A section. If you're happy to leave your name and address, we'd love to keep in touch so that we can send you information about future events. You can click on that link at any time during the session. So today's session is going to be recorded, and then the recordings and all relevant resources will be uploaded to the e-sgol website under the Carlam Cymru tab. Diolch yn fawr, Miss Davis, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. As Ms Hacker said, we are focusing tonight on Unit 1 Prose, so looking at the skills and some examination approaches you could potentially use. So before we start, regardless of what novel you are personally studying for your Unit 1 examination, what we go through in today's session should be applicable to all texts, as it's simply revising the skills. So even if I do reference, say, Sense and Sensibility, or maybe if I have a look at Jane Eyre, quite possibly, or May of Casterbridge, it's a skill set that we're looking at rather than the content of the novel, okay? So today, we're like we said, we're going to be focusing on approaching text in terms of genre, and most importantly, engaging in the close analysis of narrative, looking at aspects such as literary devices and the kind of technical terms you could potentially use. So it really, more than anything, getting you ready for the AO2 part, the analysis of with regards to extract, and also for your essay question as well. So, like I mentioned then, the use of AO1 and AO2, so what you may refer to as those two strands that you are probably quite familiar with from your English lessons. So today we're going to be questioning why to read prose and thinking about where it sits as a sort of a literary genre. So three key points to think about with regards to the genre, or three parts, are the ideas of drama, poetry and prose. And these are three aspects that you will have come across in your English literature course so far. So as it states on the slide, prose fiction, be it in the form of a novel, short story, is arguably the most popular and widely consumed literary genre. And then, like we just mentioned, the different types of genres that you could potentially come across. But one thing you need to pick up on is that each genre has its own strengths and weaknesses. So what we're going to start off with is just exploring a few texts from different genres. So we've got a little task just to start with. We're going to be looking at 3 different extracts, which are all based on the same subject, and the subject is home. So we're going to read 3 extracts, and we're going to consider the ways in which the different genres explore that idea of home. So if you want to, as we go through these, or if you are watching this back, maybe make some notes and think about things like what techniques are unique to each genre, and also think about kind of what is unique to the way in which the genres present ideas about this topic of home. You can think about maybe what is lost and gained by each genre, so what can one achieve and the other can't, and with what each genre allows us to understand because of the unique way in which they are written. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be looking at 1 poetry piece, 1 prose piece, and also a drama. So the extracts that we're looking at have come from the WJC website, where there are multiple resources available to help you with blended learning and things which will really kind of direct you in correct preparation for your examination. So the first text is a drama text, which has come from Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. So we'll have a quick read through this, but again, have a think about, you know, what is achieved with regards to establishing this sense of home here. Before us is a salesman's house. We are aware of towering angular shapes behind it, surrounding it on all sides. Only the blue light of the sky falls upon the house and forestage. The surrounding area shows an angry glow of orange. As more light appears, we see a solid vault of apartment houses around the small, fragile-seeming home. An air of the dream clings to the place, a dream rising out of reality. The kitchen at centre seems actual enough, for there is a kitchen table with 3 chairs and a refrigerator, but no other fixtures are seen. At the back of the kitchen, there is a draped entrance, which leads to the living room. To the right of the kitchen, on a level raised 2 feet, is a bedroom furnished only with a brass bedstead and a straight chair. On a shelf over the bed, a silver athletic trophy stands. A window opens onto the apartment house at the side. Behind the kitchen, on a level raised 6.5 feet, is the boys' bedroom, at present barely visible. 2 beds are dimly seen, and at the back of the room a dormer window. This bedroom is above the unseen living room. At the left, a stairway curves up to it from the kitchen. The entire setting is wholly, or in some places, partially transparent. So the use of the stage directions here almost comes across to the reader, and this is hopefully something that you've picked up on, as instructions almost. And this is what allows for quite a symbolic sort of staging here. It's quite clear from the physical detail that's provided that there's a sense of sort of oppression being presented. So you've got the adjective choices here, if you re-look at the text, of towering, and you've got the angular shapes as well. So you've got that idea of something which is elevated with the towering, and something which is almost quite influential and possibly quite powerful. And then the use of the angular shapes here, with a repeated use of adjective, suggests this idea of something which is pointed, something which is sharp, okay? And we also get a sense of that feeling of oppression, where we have the idea of behind it, surrounding it on all sides as well. And also we have the idea of the surrounding area. So almost as though there's this feeling of being trapped or enclosed. That's what's being put across or being conveyed by the author here. So using the stage directions in a really purposeful manner. So you're looking at the intent of the author, the playwright's intent. And it's the use of kind of authorial intent that will drive your analysis as well. Towards the end, you've got this sense of, again, repeated idea of this inability to escape. And there is this suggestion through the descriptions in this particular extract that home isn't being set in an overly positive way. And even where there's this idea of the kitchen in the middle, there's that quotation where it says the kitchen at the centre seems actual enough. Okay, so this introduces to us the idea of a contrast between sort of like fantasy and reality almost, especially as there's like a later reference in the extract to something which is partially transparent. So you've got this sense of something which is clear, almost see-through. And again, you've got things just before that, barely visible, and you've also got dimly seen. Okay, so a lot of different choices used by the author here. Suggestion that the home setting is one that is going to be a little bit unreliable. It indicates that maybe there is something quite unsettled or something quite inconsistent about the home. And it also reflects the personality traits, if you read the play, the personality traits of the main character. And this is achievable through these opening stage directions and these opening descriptions. Okay, we'll have a look at the extract from the poem Home is So Sad then by Philip Larkin. Home is so sad. It stays as it was left, shaped to the comfort of the last to go as if to win them back. Instead, bereft of anyone to please, it withers so, having no heart to put aside the theft and turn again to what it started as, a joyous shot to how things ought to be, long fallen wide. You can see how it was. Look at the pictures and the cutlery, the music in the piano stool, that vase. So with this particular text, readers will initially feel a real sense of empathy, as Larkin here almost encourages us as readers to mourn the loss almost of the people who have left this house. So he talks of what once was idyllic or idealized has now been lost. So he uses the adjective here of bereft and opens with home is so sad. So the superlative of so, the repeated S sound with the sibilants. But the use of the adjective here of bereft, it does suggest that something is lacking. It's been stripped bare almost, okay, of people. Okay, so bereft of anyone to please. And again, you've got that choice of withers, okay, something which is depleting, okay. It destroys any suggestion that he intends to create here an image of some sort of domesticated bliss. And again, he couples this with imagery like shot, for example, okay. And the connotations that you'd associate with that are quite negative, are quite pessimistic. And there is this sense of like loss and violence that kind of is associated with those as well. And with that, you've got the idea of how things ought to be. So almost like how things should have been, what they crave, or how society maybe believes the typical domesticated life or home should be like. But he then tells us that this domesticated life, the way people believe that they should be presenting each other, or the perception of a domesticated life, how they've long fallen wide of that, how it's something that they are quite possibly unable to sustain as a result of the people's absence, quite possibly. And then we'll have a quick look at extract C, so the prose extract. So this is from The Great Gatsby, so some of you may be familiar with this particular text. So I lived at West Egg, the less fashionable of the two, though this is a most superficial tag to express the bizarre and not a little sinister contrast between them. My house was at the very tip of the egg, only 50 yards from the Sound and squeezed between two huge places that rented for 12 or 15,000 a season. The one on my right was a colossal affair by any standard. It was a factual imitation of some Hotel de Ville in Normandy, with a tower on one side, spanking new under a thin beard of raw ivy, and a marble swimming pool, and more than 40 acres of lawn and garden. It was Gatsby's mansion, or rather, as I didn't know Mr. Gatsby, it was a mansion inhabited by a gentleman of that name. My own house was an eyesore, but it was a small eyesore, and it had been overlooked. So I had a view of the water, a partial view of my neighbour's lawn, and the consoling proximity of millionaires, all for $80 a month. So here we find the sort of usual metaphors, which are quite common to prose and poetry. And in this particular, we see Nick, the narrator, we see him casting judgment on Gatsby and his home. And despite stating that Gatsby's house is a colossal affair, because that's how he refers to it in the text. So despite saying that, what we sort of get the impression of as readers is that we're left to kind of wonder, or left to question, whether the judgment shown in that word colossal, okay, whether or not that is real, or is it as a consequence of his sort of inferiority. Okay, there's a real tone of judgment in the phrasing choice here, okay? It was a colossal affair, so something which is really sort of quite something else is what he's suggesting. So what we need to question is he maybe over-exaggerating, and do we trust his judgment? So the reliability of the narrator is something that we can potentially consider here. And then you've got the tone, again, with how he refers to his own house, with a repeated use of the words or the phrasing choice of I saw. And there is something quite self-critical in that, okay? But then towards the end, you've got the use of millionaires, okay? that last phrasing when he says, "on the consoling proximity of millionaires, all for $80 a month." And the reference to millionaires, and then you've got the use of the purposeful pause, the use of the caesura there. And there's this feeling then from readers that there is this smugness about him, there is this smug quality, that he is gloating a little there in his discussion of that particular part, okay? So we'll have a look then now at the different types of prose and go through things that you might be familiar with. So prose, what is it? So the ordinary form of spoken or written language without any metrical structure, as distinguished from poetry or verse. So things like novels, that's what you'd be mostly familiar with, short stories, essays, letters, articles, journals, etc. So different types of prose you may have come across. These should be familiar to you as well. So the types of things that you may analyse or choose to analyse in a prose text. So you have things like the narrative structure, the use of chronology, narrative voice or perspective, the use of speech, prose style, language choices, including sentence structure, for example, repeated images, symbolism, motifs, any themes that are prominent, settings, characters, and also the use of genre and generic conventions. So one thing the students with me seem to struggle with are narrative approaches, not just identifying them, but also sort of looking at what the purpose of the narrative approaches are. So down the left-hand column, what you've got there are the different narrative approaches that you may come across in your given text. So I'll just quickly go through them. So you've got third person limited, third person omniscient, participant narrator, unreliable, self-conscious, intrusive narrator, often have multiple voices, first person narrative, focalizer, stream of consciousness, second person address, and then also an interior monologue. And on the right hand side, you've got the matchups, so the definitions that go with the names, okay? So have a think about those. Again, another task you can do, try and maybe test yourself or work with a partner, and you can go through them together. So on the next slide, you have got the correct answers. Okay, so these are put in correct order for you, so you can have a look at those in your own time. But probably the one that you're most familiar with is the third person limited or third person omniscient, or even the first person narrative. And for example, like unreliable narrator, you may find that there's a narrator that you have got but you don't necessarily trust. So like I was saying earlier about the narrative, do you necessarily trust what's being said? So do you question it? So have a look through those in your own time. But for now, we'll just continue kind of going through the ideas of narratives, how we can define it, just so you understand what the purpose of or the impact of narrative is. So you've got stories involving a sequence of narrated events. The narrative content refers to events in a story and characters in a story and what happens to them. The narrative form refers to how narrative content is formed. Okay, so the way in which it is formed. So stories can be told in two different ways. So you've got content order, so the order in which the events in a story actually happened, and then the form order, so the order of events the narrator or author chooses to tell you the events in. And that's quite common, like it could be in the form of flashbacks, fragmented time, and there's also the mismatch between content order and form order, so a combination of the two. And again, this is the idea of like where the authorial intent comes in. So this is an intentional strategy adopted by authors to create this sense of suspense and mystery and tension, to kind of organize understanding, to possibly try and like withhold information, to deceive, to manipulate perception, or to also challenge our narrative expectations. So what we need to consider and really think about, especially you approaching your analysis, is why order of select events. Okay, so the plot is the way the story unfolds, it's not the chronology of events. So the chronology is how events unfold in their chronological order, time order. Okay, and that's the way that they'd occur if they were actual real events. And this is always linear. So one event happens after another, and there's always a sense of cause and effect, and it kind of like links to each one, like something like a domino effect. Then we've got the idea of the reference to plot as well. So the plot is the fictional counterpart to the chronology of events. So some stories use a linear plot, one that really kind of sticks to and follows the chronological course of events. But more often than not, this doesn't happen. And the reason for that, it follows, okay? So the nature of narration doesn't allow for things to be sort of chronologically ordered. Although some events may occur at the same time in real life, it's difficult to kind of replicate that in narration. And also we may choose to recount events not on the basis of the chronological order, but because of their impact on the plot. So maybe the most important event will be prominent, and then the others will kind of like surround it regardless of like the actual chronological order. Okay, and this is again the idea that it's something which is purposeful, and what the author is doing is manipulating the timeline, and that's what storytelling is, okay? And that's what gives kind of the idea of the narrative definition. So our narrative expectations are often, when they're subverted, what you get is a sense of like us being able to gain some more information about the author or the characters, and it's what we call a narrative drive, and it's our desire to want to turn the pages and want to know what happens next, essentially. So the nature of narrative, and some things you've probably been discussing in your lessons, is things like the pace of the narrative. So does it slow? Does it accelerate? Does it sort of focus on minor events? Does the author try to speed it up by using a quick kind of a chapter, almost like a fill-in, to kind of recount maybe a span of, say, 10 years so that they can actually reach the main event, okay? Like by accelerating it, by condensing, like I've just said, or compressing major events. So sometimes you have an author who will cover a span of 15 years in the space of a chapter, quite possibly. Then you've got the idea of narrative coherence. So are we presented with a unified story, something which could possibly just be summed up by the title of the text? And then the use of narrator and the narrative style or approach is what we could possibly look at as well. So we're going to have a quick look at the tone of the narration from the text in front of you. So this slide has got an extract on it from The Catcher in the Rye. And when we read through, what I want you to think about, like I just said, is the tone of the narration. So again, something you could do in your own time as well, have a read through it and then write down some ideas linked to that. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like, and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it, if you want to know the truth. In the first place, that stuff bores me. And in the second place, my parents have had 2 hemorrhages apiece if I told anything pretty personal about them. They're quite touchy about anything like that, especially my father. They're nice and all. I'm not saying that, but they're also touchy as hell. Besides, I'm not going to tell you my whole goddamn autobiography or anything. I'll just tell you about this madman stuff that happened to me around last Christmas, just before I got pretty run down and had to come out here and take it easy. So whether or not you got this initially, but after a couple of reads of this particular extract, so this has come from J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, what you get is a sense of this touch of arrogance from the character, the main character of Holden Caulfield, especially in this opening section where you see him being quite dismissive of Dickens's David Copperfield, as he refers to it as crap here, okay? So even something like that, you get that sense of dismissive phrasing. We also get a sense of like him as this quite over the top, exaggerated character. So he talks of this particular phrase where my parents would have had 2 hemorrhages apiece if I told anything pretty personal about them. So the hyperbolic or exaggerated 2 hemorrhages apiece when discussing their reaction, again, alongside the arrogance that we've just seen, would definitely make us as readers question the character. So the tone of narration is really important. Remembering that in your Unit 1 examination, the first part you're going to have with regards to your prose is the extract. So you're going to have to engage with the tone of the narration quite quickly. Okay, so with this particular one, like I just said, the exaggeration alongside the arrogance makes us question the character. We feel right from the outset that he, Holden Caulfield, is going to be possibly biased and will probably be withholding information, okay? Will keep information back, and he will sort of drip feed or divulge what he wants to divulge. And possibly then, as a consequence, we as readers don't necessarily trust him then as a result. And if you look at that last line, I'll just tell you about this madman stuff. So definitely trying to engage with us as readers, okay? The suggestion, not giving us any detail, okay? Trying to hook us in. That happened to me around last Christmas, just before I got pretty run down and had to come out here and take it easy. Again, no reasoning behind it. Out here, where? Again, making us question, engaging us as readers. So these are the sort of things you could potentially pick up on in an extract, okay? But there's this close analysis that you are getting here, all right? So you'll find it quite easy, like I've just said, to pick up on the tone of the narration, okay, when analysing the first person prose. So being told about the events of the novel through one person's perspective. So it's easy to get a sense of their voice as we read. When it comes to third person narratives, it gets a little bit trickier. The first thing to be aware of is the tone of third person narrative. So whether there's an omniscient or limited viewpoint or free and direct discourse or speech, it's usually not neutral and is often biased. So generally, that's kind of the rule of thumb. And there could be a number of reasons for this. For example, you may find that the author may be using the narrative to reflect their personal ideas, or perhaps ideas which reflect the opinions of society. Say when the text was written, for example, the tone could be sardonic, used by the author to mock certain characters, to possibly mock not just the characters, but their values, their opinions, in an effort to enlighten us as readers as well, okay? So we're going to quickly skip through literary terms. So these are things that I would assume that you have got a grasp of by now, bear in mind that your examination is in a couple of months. So we'll quickly go through the terms and the definitions that link with them. And if there are any that are sort of unfamiliar with you, like Ms. Hacker said at the start, please keep in touch, please ask, we're here to facilitate and to give you any extra information that you may need. So you've got the terms of narration, dialogue, character and characterization, settings, patterns, handling of time, control of information, speech styles, imagery, and diction. So the surroundings of the novel, including physical locations, cultures, communities, times of day, night, year, not always picturesque, but used to convey ideas about characters, themes, and mood. So here you've got the use of setting, use of repetition, contrast, motifs, repeated images, repeated phrases, repeated descriptions. The whole purpose of those is to draw our attention as readers to specific ideas or a message that the author is trying to present. So you've got the use of patterns. When you consider whether the writer presents information in a realistic chronological sequence, or maybe they choose to use devices such as flashbacks, time shifts, all part of the novel's plot. So we've got the use of the handling of time, using literal or figurative language with sensory appeal, appealing to our imagination. So use of metaphor, simile, symbolism, personification. So here we've got the use of imagery, the speak style, be it dialect, standard English, okay, use of speech styles. The characters is a selection of words used in a work. Sometimes you could refer to them as semantic fields. It could be use of religious words, word classes, active verbs of violence, so the diction, how authors tell their stories, so narrative point of view, and their degrees of knowledge, so the narration style. So the first term seems too easy to bother with a definition, but you need to make sure you remember these figures are fictional devices, not real people. The second term refers to the set of established literary techniques used to create these fictional figures. And that's really quite important. In a lot of the exam feedback that we get, examiners' feedback based on what candidates have written in the past, it's quite often that the principal examiner's report mentions the idea that candidates are still talking about the characters as though they are real people, and there's this real need, this intense need to remember that they're figures and they're fictional devices. They've been created by the author. They're not real people. So just reminding yourself of that when you talk about them. So, for example, Hardy depicts henchard ads, looking at the author. So here Hardy has attempted to create henchard ads. Henchard is shown to be a, okay, so making sure you've got the correct phrasing in your approach to that. The next one then, looking at the parts of novels written as conversation, fictional representation of speech, and different novels use it. So the use of dialogue, again, sometimes overlooked. You could even look at the dialogue weighting, speech weighting, quite possibly, whether or not one commands or demands the speech. To consider the insignificance of beginnings and ending, the way things are sequenced, if things are particularly withheld or revealed to a reader or an audience. So that's the use of control of information. And just quickly, we'll have a look at the characterization here. So in a table are some of the most common features used by authors when creating characters. So again, you're probably quite familiar with these. So their names, do their names have a particular meaning? Is there an allusion to something in their names? So the way in which dialogue is used, like I was just saying, the idea that sometimes one particular character is quite dominant in the dialogue. What other characters say about them? So sometimes in novels, you learn a lot about a character before you even meet them, whether or not you decide you can trust that. But we do learn a lot about others from the viewpoints of other characters. The description of their physical appearance, their thoughts, their feelings, the way in which they're presented through their narrative viewpoint or their narrative voice, any motifs or any imagery and symbols that are particularly associated with them. Again, that could be linked to their physical appearance, what they're wearing, their look, for example. It could also be linked to their job, so what they do. And then obviously we've got to consider the physical environment with which they're associated. So little things we can consider when thinking about the idea of characterization. So here we've got an extract. So there's a few extracts we're going to quickly look at. So there are some prominent differences being shown between the three extracts that we're going to be looking at in a second. Okay, so we'll read through this one. So I've already marked my beginning, the explosion of consequences, with a touch of a wine bottle and a shout of distress. But this pinprick is as notional as a point in Euclidean geometry, as though it seems right. I could have proposed the moment Clarissa and I planned to picnic, after I collected her from the airport, or when we decided on our route, or the field in which to have lunch, and the time we chose to have it. There are always antecedent causes. So what we're thinking about here, okay, like most fundamental or key points when studying English literature, narrative viewpoint and narrative voice, it's not a simple kind of black and white area. So when analysing a piece of prose for its use of narrative viewpoint or narrative voice, we need to also think about the effects of the choices. And we'll have a think about these when we go through these 3 points here, okay, these 3 extracts. So this one, if we have a think about the use of characterization here, focusing on how and why characters have been created. So the writers that we're going to look at, they use a wide range of techniques in order to create character. Here in these 3 slides, we'll look at the author's kind of craft and the way in which they've constructed it, okay? So we've had a quick look at the enduring love one, and when we look at the others as well, have a think about things like what age you think the speaker is, what sex, their social status, their character traits, and try and focus on the idea of narrative voice, okay? So if we're thinking about this one, for example, we assume, or we get the impression that he is male, and we get a sense of him being middle class, quite possibly. The reason that we think that he is middle class, or we make the assumption that he's middle class, we could have a look at maybe the reference to the touch of a wine bottle, okay? We could look at that quite possibly. And we could also look at the lifestyle that's being hinted at here. All of these planned activities. So I plan to picnic after collecting her from the airport, and we decide on our route, the field in which to have lunch, okay? And also look at the vocabulary choices. So you've got this reference to Euclidean geometry, okay? So this type of sort of mathematical system that's being referenced, and the antecedent. So something which is logically precedes something. Okay, that language choice is really quite challenging to a point as well. So we do get a clear sense of that individual right from the outset. Here then we have got the second, and this is from The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. So we'll have a quick read of this. This is a murder mystery novel. Siobhan said that I should write something I would want to read myself. Mostly I read books of science and maths. I don't like proper novels. In proper novels, people say things like, I am veined with iron, with silver, and with streaks of common mud. I cannot contract into the firm fist which those clench who do not depend on stimulus. What does this mean? I do not know. Nor does father, nor does Siobhan or Mr. Jevons. I have asked them. Siobhan has long blonde hair and wears glasses, which are made of green plastic. Mr. Jevons smells of soap and wears brown shoes of approximately 60 tiny circular holes in each of them. So the first thing that you may notice here is the sentence structure and the length of the utterances, which possibly give us some clues about this particular character. Lots of very short, sharp sentences, and there's this sense of immaturity being presented with some of the detail that we look at. So things like, I do not like proper novels, okay? Even just like the phrasing of that shows a sense of immaturity. And then we look at the level of observational detail where he notices that Siobhan wears glasses made of green plastic, and also the fact that Mr. Jevons, he smells of soap, he wears brown shoes that have approximately 60 tiny circular holes in each of them. Okay, so the factual precision rejects kind of typical approaches here, okay? It hints here towards quite a complex character and possibly more complicated than what our initial or original assumption may be, okay? And then we'll have a look at Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. So this starts with, do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain and little, I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you and full as much heart. And if God had gifted me with some beauty and much wealth, I should have made it hard for you to leave me, as it is now for me to leave you. So what we've got here with the characterization, it's all revealed through the tone. What we have is this passionate, straight-talking character being revealed through the repeated use of things such as the repeated exclamative here, okay, and at the end here, the use of the questioning, the interrogatives, okay? This is clearly a character determined to make her emotions evident, okay? Even the repeated use of the caesura here, okay? Again, it sort of shows or reflects a sense of frustration alongside the listing that she makes with poor, obscure, plain and little. So we get a sense of the type of character, the characterization revealed through the tone, the way in which she says things, okay? So a number of the techniques that we have looked at are also relevant when considering the dialogue. So like I mentioned earlier, the balance or the weighting of the dialogue. Does one speaker dominate? Are there interruptions? Think about the impact of it. You could also look at the use of tags, which are normally adjectives or adverbs in dialogue. So, for example, she said with affection, or said Peter, his tone malevolent. So allowing us a little bit more information and detail because of the use of the tags, okay? Characters in a prose text, they have multiple purposes. Some texts have narratives which have been written for more serious purpose, and others are different. Sometimes characters in text are used to draw attention to a key idea or issue that the writer wanted to explore, and this is what we'd consider authorial intent. What we've got coming up next are some things for you to consider and some revision tasks that you can possibly do in your own time and things for you to think about. So what we got quickly is some feedback, like I said, from the principal examiner. So initially looking at your extract. So just a reminder that you've only got 20 minutes, okay, and that you really need to make sure that you engage immediately and closely with the extract. You don't need to spend loads of time positioning it within the text. You don't need to be retelling the plot. You have to remember that the examiners, the people marking your papers, they've read the books, they know what the text is about, okay? And that the better responses commented on technique as well as connotations of language. So the writer's technique, the writer's intentions, what has he or she done? And again, that reminder that you have got no marks for AO3 for context. So even if you've got some wonderful contextual sort of references to sort of social or historical kind of issues, there are no marks awarded for that, okay? So again, here a little bit of help that you and guidance for you with regards to things like timing, reminding you to stay focused on the task. Is the point that you're making relevant? Make sure that you reflect upon the passage or the extract, and you've got purposeful annotations. And these are skills that you should be developing in your lessons, a purposeful annotation, spotting patterns, and going through it in quite a structured manner. As well, you've got the use of the marking grids here for you. An example extract, you could possibly have a read through that. Again, it doesn't matter whether you're doing Hardy's Castle Bridge or not. You should be able to approach any extract and answer it effectively. And then you've got an example answer, so you can see what a good answer is like, okay? Then you've got the grid for your first section again. Read through this answer on the following slide, annotate it then looking at AO1 and AO2, think about what you would reward, and also another task for you to find 3 problems with the response, focusing on how Bronte presents Jane's state of mind. Again, here you've got an example answer, some possible ideas that could be linked to that. So use these resources to help you structure your revision as well. So going to the essay then, we've got some more feedback from the principal examiner. So the approach is what's important here, and the reminder that you're not supposed to revisit that extract in detail. That's meant to just kind of like push you or springboard you into the essay. And again, similar to the extract question, the retelling of the plot is self-penalising. And just a reminder that despite there being heavier weightings, or 15 marks apiece for AO3 and AO5, and only 5 apiece for AO1 and 2, You have to remember that you've got to weave the context and different interpretations into your own analysis. AO2 is the anchor for AO3 and 5, okay? So task, text, context is how the WJC would like to see you approach this. And again, just be mindful and careful with your written expression. And then what you've got there in front of you are 3 possible introductions. So this is just a comparative judgment task for you to decide which one begins to engage best with the text or the task, and for you to put them in some sort of rank order. And then what you've got are the them in the order, okay, from what the examiners have said there at the end. Thank you so much for your time. This time next week, we will be going through the same ideas for Unit 1, but we're going to be approaching the drama side of the paper, so the section B. So it would be lovely to have you all with us next week as well.